Welcome to Taiwan Tech Dispatch. I'm your host, White Shu. This is episode 51. When people talk about Taiwan's economic importance, one company usually dominates the conversation: TSMC, and for good reason. TSMC manufactures some of the world's most advanced semiconductors. Its customers include many of the biggest names in technology, and its role in the global AI economy has made Taiwan impossible to ignore. But there is a problem with looking at Taiwan only through TSMC. You see the giant, but you miss the ecosystem underneath it. Taiwan's industrial strength does not come from one company alone. It comes from thousands of specialized manufacturers, component suppliers, materials companies, equipment makers, engineering firms, and industrial service providers. Many are small or medium-sized enterprises. Most are unknown outside their industries. Some do not have famous brands. Some have surprisingly simple websites. And many will probably never appear on the front page of the Financial Times or Wall Street Journal. But somewhere inside a factory in Germany, Japan, the United States, or Southeast Asia, their products may be absolutely essential. These are Taiwan's hidden gems. And today, I want to explore a simple question. Why does Taiwan produce so many of them? Chapter 1: The invisible backbone of Taiwan. If you look at Taiwan from outside, its economy can seem surprisingly concentrated. TSMC dominates advanced semiconductor manufacturing. Foxconn is one of the world's largest electronics manufacturers. MediaTek is a major semiconductor design company. And companies like Quanta, Wistron, and Inventec are becoming increasingly important in the AI server boom. But this view is incomplete, because beneath these large corporations sits a much wider industrial network. Think about connectors, precision machining, thermal management, power supplies, specialty chemicals, optical components, testing equipment, industrial automation, metal processing, electronic components, packaging, and countless other highly specialized categories. In many of these industries, you will find Taiwanese companies that most consumers have never heard of. Yet, these companies may have spent 20 or 30 years mastering one very specific capability. They may not control an entire market. They may not own a global consumer brand. But they might be among the best companies in the world at doing one particular thing. This is an important characteristic of Taiwan's economy. It is not simply an economy with a few giant companies and thousands of small businesses surrounding them. It is an economy built around dense networks of specialized suppliers. You can think of TSMC and Taiwan's other famous technology companies as the visible part of an iceberg. They are what the world sees, but underneath the surface is an enormous industrial ecosystem that makes the visible part possible. Chapter 2. What exactly is a hidden gem? So, what do I mean when I call a company a hidden gem? I am not talking about the next hot stock. I am not trying to predict the next unicorn. And I am definitely not looking for the next NVIDIA. My definition is much simpler. A hidden gem is a company that is relatively invisible to the public, but disproportionately important to its customers. Its product might look boring. Its market might look small. Its growth rate might not impress venture capital investors. But removing that company from a supply chain could create a surprisingly large problem. That is what makes these businesses interesting. You could almost describe the formula like this: low visibility, high specialization, high switching costs. The combination creates a hidden gem. These companies often operate in narrow niches where reliability matters more than publicity. Customers may spend years qualifying their products. Engineers on both sides may work together to optimize specifications. Production processes become interconnected. Quality standards become deeply understood. And over time, what initially looked like a simple supplier relationship becomes something much harder to replace. Financial markets sometimes struggle with companies like this. There may not be an exciting story to tell, but operationally, they can be extremely important. And the gap between market visibility and operational importance is exactly where many hidden gems exist. Chapter 3. Why Taiwan produces so many of them. So why Taiwan? Why has this relatively small island produced such a dense population of specialized industrial companies? Part of the answer comes from constraint. Taiwan has a relatively small domestic market. For many manufacturers, becoming globally competitive was never optional. If you wanted to grow, eventually you had to sell outside Taiwan. That created a very different mindset. Taiwanese companies learned early that they had to compete with companies from Japan, Germany, the United States, South Korea, and eventually China. And if you are a small Taiwanese manufacturer, you probably cannot win simply because you are bigger. You cannot always spend more on marketing. You cannot rely on a huge domestic market. And you cannot assume customers will stay with you because of your brand. So, what can you compete on? Engineering, quality, speed, customization, cost control, reliability, and customer relationships. Over decades, these pressures created a particular kind of company. A company that does not necessarily try to dominate an entire industry. Instead, it tries to become indispensable within a narrow part of that industry. And that leads to one of the most important ideas in this episode. Don't try to own the entire market. Own one thing that the market cannot operate without. That is a very different strategy from the Silicon Valley model. Silicon Valley often celebrates massive addressable markets, exponential growth, platform effects, and winner takes most outcomes. Taiwan's traditional industrial model is often almost the opposite. Find a narrow problem, solve it extremely well, build relationships with demanding global customers, improve the process every year, and keep doing it for decades. It is not glamorous, but it is remarkably durable. Chapter 4: Why these companies are so hard to replace. And this brings us to perhaps the most misunderstood part of Taiwan's industrial advantage. The moat is not always visible. When investors talk about competitive advantages, they often look for patents, brands, network effects, or proprietary technology. Those things matter, but industrial companies often build another kind of moat: tacit knowledge. Knowledge that is accumulated through years of production. How to maintain yield, how to control tolerances, how materials behave under different conditions, how to adjust a process when something goes wrong, how to deliver exactly what a customer needs repeatedly at scale. Much of this knowledge may never appear in a patent. It may not even exist in a formal document. It lives inside engineering teams, production lines, supplier relationships, and organizational routines. Then there is qualification. For critical components, global customers do not simply choose the cheapest supplier on the internet. A new supplier may need to pass testing, validation, quality audits, reliability requirements, and sometimes months or years of qualification. Switching suppliers therefore creates risk, and risk has a cost. If an existing Taiwanese supplier delivers consistent quality, responds quickly to engineering changes, and has worked with the customer for 15 years, replacing that supplier may save a few percentage points on price. But it could introduce uncertainty into the entire production process. That is why trust itself becomes infrastructure, and this is one of the most powerful yet least visible characteristics of Taiwan's industrial ecosystem. The moat is not always one breakthrough technology. Sometimes the moat is 30 years of not disappointing your customer. Chapter 5: Taiwan's real moat is multiplicity. This brings us back to the bigger picture. Taiwan is often discussed through individual champions: TSMC, Foxconn, MediaTek, and increasingly, the companies supplying the AI infrastructure boom. But Taiwan's resilience does not come only from this giant. It comes from multiplicity. Thousands of companies, thousands of engineering teams, thousands of specialized production capabilities, and decades of relationships connecting them together. This is why I like to describe Taiwan's industrial strengths this way. Taiwan's resilience comes from scale through multiplicity, not dominance through singularity. And this distinction matters because when governments around the world talk about rebuilding semiconductor or advanced manufacturing capacity, they often focus on the most visible layer: build the fab, subsidize the factory, attract the flagship company. But a factory is not an ecosystem. Behind advanced manufacturing are materials, suppliers, equipment vendors, maintenance providers, precision components manufacturers, chemical companies, logistics networks, engineering talent, and countless specialized businesses. Many of them took decades to develop. So the real question is not simply, can another country build a semiconductor fab? Of course it can. The harder question is, can another country reproduce the industrial network surrounding that fab? That is much more difficult because factories can be built with capital. Ecosystems require time. Closing, looking for Taiwan's hidden gems. And that is why I started the Hidden Gems series, not to find the next market darling, not to recommend the next stock everyone should buy, but to understand the companies that quietly make global industries work. Over the coming episodes, we will look beneath Taiwan's most famous companies. We will explore specialized manufacturers, technology suppliers, industrial businesses, and companies that may be almost invisible to consumers, but extremely difficult for their customers to replace. Because if you want to understand Taiwan's real economic strengths, looking only at the giants is not enough. You have to understand the ecosystem underneath them. And sometimes, the most important companies are the ones almost nobody is talking about. This is Taiwan Tech Dispatch. I'm White Shu. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show and share it with someone who wants to understand the companies, technologies, and industrial forces shaping Taiwan's role in the global economy. And I'll see you in the next episode.